Hi there. Welcome to Managing in the Moment. I am so excited that you're here. This is a weekly series that is for you. If you are a people manager, this series is this is for you. If you're looking to become a more effective leader, and specifically if you're looking for practical approaches that are going to really help when it comes to managing in a modern workplace. So the show, as always, is brought to you by Improv EQ, which is a consulting organization specializing in management and team communication. As always, I am your host, Betsaida LeBron. I am the founder of Improv EQ, as well as a management coach and team building strategist. I I have the pleasure of every week I get to interview different guests and talk to them about some interesting kind of aspects of management and kind of explore some of these topics and what's been so much fun. And I have so many guests that are lined up and some just really great things. And putting the show together has been so much fun. And the guests are so great as far as the things that they're bringing. And this week is no exception. I got to talk to Alex Sperry, who's an employment attorney. We talked about just some really interesting ways that I hadn't really thought about as far as mitigating unnecessary employer liability when it comes to workplace culture. And really the cool thing about kind of having these conversations is I think that the way that he kind of breaks it down is it makes it really tangible, the kinds of things that you really can be doing and the things that you can be thinking about to take care of yourself and take care of your team and take care of the liability for your organization as long as you're thinking about it. And so I really loved this conversation. I think it's really going to be a benefit to you as you listen to it. And as always, the goal of these conversations of this show is to help you as a manager, because it is not easy to be a manager. We talk about this in our talk, and we know that it's not just something that is, that's easy and that happens. There's a lot that you're juggling constantly, things that you're thinking about and things that you're doing. And so there's a lot going on. And so if we can make that a little bit easier for you and take out some of that guesswork, that's really what I hope that this show helps you do. So it's a really great conversation that I have with Alex. I know you're going to really get a lot of benefit from it. So as always, the interviews are pre-recorded, so I'm going to key that up, but I will be here in the chat live, and I will see you on the other side of the video. My guest this week is Alex Sperry. Alex has been named as one of Sacramento's top employment lawyers. He is a specialist in workplace investigations and has a keen understanding of workplace dynamics and issues affecting employer-employee relationships. I'm so excited you could be here.
I'm really excited to be here. Thanks, Betsaida.
Yeah. So in talking in preparation for the show, it really stood out to me. You mentioned how a lot of employees actually sue when it comes to feeling disrespected. And I thought that was just so fascinating and so interesting. Could you talk a little bit about what you meant when you said that?
Sure. Yeah, and that's something that I heard early on in my career. I've been doing employment law over 20 years, and I think at one of my first jobs, I had a manager, a boss, who impressed upon me that concept, and she told a story where an employee filed a lawsuit against their employer, and she had gotten a call from the plaintiff's lawyer, the employee's lawyer, and said, we've got this claim, but here's the deal. The employee didn't get a cake party on her last day of employment, whereas everyone else who's left that job got the cake party. And that's why my client's upset. And so I just wanted you to know that so that, we can hopefully put this thing to bed quickly. So I thought it was really interesting when she said that, because it had never occurred to me that people file lawsuits, not necessarily because they think they've been aggrieved in a legal way, but because they're angry, because they feel that they've been slighted in some way. And in hearing that then, and in 20 years later, thinking upon it, it's so true. I see that all the time in both my background in litigation and then now doing investigation work, is that people raise complaints and have concerns a lot of times because of slights, things that the manager doesn't even appreciate, which is, really interesting.
That is so interesting and so relevant for managers who are listening right now to recognize that it's not just about, following the letter of the law, but there's all of these kind of those relationship building kind of skills and taking care of your people that is so important. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. And, I think a lot of times employers overlook that as a skill that managers should have. In my career, I've seen incidents and claims come to fruition because employees get promoted into management positions because they're good workers. They make good widgets and they're fast in their job or whatever, and they don't necessarily have or have had training to be a good manager, which is a completely different skill. But sometimes employers are reticent to correct or curb problem management, soft skill type behavior because they're such a good worker. And so you have this sort of conundrum of, is this person the best manager even though they're a really good employee? Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Yeah, I see that also where it's like it's such a different skill set, right? Managing people is a completely different thing, but it sounds like a lot of where the tension lies is that people to people dynamic, right?
That's it, is that, when people are able to focus on not just did the person do a good job for me, right? Or did they turn in the project on time? But, how are they as a team member, and, what's really going on in terms of their performance? If you're a manager and you have an employee whose performance has fallen off recently, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a slight against you. It may be something's going on that you don't know about, and being a good manager means coaching that employee and finding out, what you can do to help them. And again, managers sometimes lack that skill or don't appreciate how important it is.
Yeah. And you kind of touch on something about like the importance of how much people need to build those skills. It's not something that everybody naturally has. And that's what I say all the time is like, we're not born with these people skills. These are things we have to cultivate over time. So I know you do coaching, and sometimes the way that you get involved in a company might be because of something that was maybe started as negative or potentially a problem or something, and then they bring you in. How much of that ends up being kind of some soft skills coaching that you end up doing?
A lot of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say a lot of it is just talking through the situation and giving them pointers and tips on how to think about things differently going forward. And I would say a lot of times, I think it's rare that I find managers who are intentionally mean or bullies.
Yeah.
They do occur once in a while, but I think for the most part, people aren't appreciating how their behavior comes across.
Yeah.
And so talking with them in a way that helps them understand and appreciate the effect of their behaviors is the goal and the key to sort of correcting that performance for the manager.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I say so many times in different like training spaces that I have that I'm like, nobody wakes up and goes, you know what? I'm just going to suck at work today. Like, I'm just going to be a horrible manager. Like, that's not a thing, but we just don't realize the effect we have on other people. I think that's so
Yep.
true. Yeah.
And we're busy, right? And we have deadlines and people over us as managers who are maybe, stressing us out. And so it's real easy to fall in that trap of, I don't need to be nice. I need to get it done, or the like. And what I see is that ultimately creates unhappy employees who maybe make legal claims, maybe make complaints to HR that then have to be investigated, and I get involved. So both to curb against those legal costs, and more importantly, just to create an environment where people feel safe and comfortable at work and are able to do their best work. This is something managers hopefully think about. And, I think your program here of really addressing it head on is a great thing in preventing these issues from coming up in the first place. And that's really when I do my trainings on whether it's sexual harassment prevention or becoming a better manager. I really focus on that preventative element and investing up front in thinking about these things. So your program falls right in line.
Yeah. I mean, it's so true that prevention is so important. It's so costly. I mean, when it gets to, your level where there's legal claims and things are, being brought up, but even before it gets to that point when there's employees that are, they're, disengaged, they're not really giving their best. The cost is so high.
Yep.
Yeah. And so this idea that, like, we have to, people have a hard time, I think, for managers, and you spoke on this point where, like, especially those who have managers above them, it's really overwhelming. And this idea of, like, I don't have time to be nice, it can really hurt people. So what are some of the things maybe that you can speak to about when we're saying, like, be nice? Because maybe some managers, like, they don't know what that means.
Yeah.
So could you speak on that a little bit? Like, what does
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
does that really mean?
Yeah, being nice. If it was all that easy, just to sum it up in one word, right? I think it's going to be different for different managers, and we all have our Achilles heels as far as what we don't do well in communicating. But one thing I see that is the antithesis of being nice, or potentially what gets managers into hot water, is firing off the emotional email or text message or other communication to their employees. I think it's so important to take a step back, you know, let the email marinate, if you will, overnight, and look at it again in the morning to make sure that this is something that you still want to say, because those emails become evidence in litigation down the road and can really be detrimental to your cause. I guess more importantly, or more generally, those emails have an effect on the reader. And they create situations where people feel disrespected, or people assume things about the tone of the email that maybe you didn't intend. But email, as we all know, is one of these things where you don't get to see the person's facial expression or hear the volume of their voice. And so you read into it a lot of times. And that's also something that managers have to be aware of.
Yeah. And it also depends so much on the relationship they already have with that staff who's reading that email. Because when you send an email, because there's no tone, there's so much that, like you said, they're reading into it, but it also has to do with, like, everything else that has come before this moment. So it really, that's so smart to just, like, sit on it. I also sometimes say, maybe have somebody else look at it that isn't involved, just to give you more of an objective, because a lot of times we can't be objective when we're emotional.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great suggestion. I love that too, especially if, let's say, one of the most difficult times in a manager's career may be where an employee has made a complaint about them, but they're still managing them, right? And maybe the complaint is being investigated by someone like me outside, but they still have to have this relationship. And so, especially in those sort of really potentially fraught situations, having a second eye, whether it's somebody in HR or another colleague in management, look at the communication with an eye towards, are you coming across in a way that could be perceived as retaliation? That's really, really key.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of want to shift gears just a little bit and talk about, a lot of times when there is an issue that's coming up and it's not addressed right away, it kind of snowballs to where, there can be bigger concerns. And so when you're talking to managers or helping them think about how they can kind of just nip things in the bud, or however you would say that, like, when something first comes up, especially when it's something negative, right? There's a negative issue. I think a lot of us have an easier time when something is good to highlight it and speak on it. But when there's something that needs to be corrected and that feedback is negative, at least in my experience working with different managers, there seems to be this some managers are like, I'm not going to touch it. I'm just going to hope that they can tell that it's not good. And then there's other managers that are very quick to fix it, but almost aggressively. And I think both are a problem. What do you tell people when it comes to fixing issues that arise?
Yeah, yeah. Part of being a good manager is not being a conflict avoider, and that's tough because a lot of us are, myself included, right? And so, I try to impress upon managers that when you have an employee who hasn't performed to your expectation, whether that's in their work or their behavior, you have to address it head on. And doing that in a way, I like to use the word coaching instead of discipline, because it paints it in a really positive light, right? You're trying to get the employee back on track. Your ultimate goal is not to discipline the employee or even potentially fire them. It's to get them back on track and be a good employee. So it's really kind of resetting the mindset of the supervisor and manager in that positive frame. But ultimately, they're going to have perhaps a difficult conversation. And so not doing it off the cuff, preparing, taking some notes, maybe talking again with a colleague or HR about the best approach, and not doing it when you're tired or emotional, et cetera. So you're having the best frame of mind to go into that conversation is also important. But you really can't sit on it because problems don't go away, usually in my experience, on their own. And an employee may not even know that they're not meeting expectations until you tell them, right? Part of being a good manager is setting very clear expectations and boundaries for your employees. So, being reticent to communicate and not address those issues gets you into trouble. The other thing I think that I always think about when I have situations where managers or supervisors are not addressing issues head on is the potential for a retaliation claim. So let me explain what that looks like. You have an employee perhaps that's not a good performer, but for whatever reason, the manager isn't keen on addressing it right away. Well, maybe then the employee down the road files a sexual harassment or age discrimination complaint with HR. Now, for the first time, the employer comes out and says, okay, we need to coach you on improving your performance. Well, what does that look like to the employee? It looks like you're retaliating now for them filing a complaint, even though their performance has been poor the whole time. So there's a lot of reasons why sitting on employees' performance issues is not a good idea.
Yeah, that's true. I've definitely seen that, and it is from the perspective of the employees. Like, if this wasn't a problem before, why is it a problem now? And the thing is, like, it's always been an issue. It just nobody wanted to actually address it. And
it gets back to our disrespect thing as well, because it's not respectful to an employee to suddenly, a lot of times this happens at the time of the annual performance review, right? Employees shouldn't be hearing about problem performance for the first time at a performance review. And that is a form of disrespect, not allowing an employee the opportunity to improve their performance prior to them getting a poor review, which could affect their salary or their bonus or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely heard that, where people are like, if I've been I've been doing it wrong the whole time, why didn't you tell me? And it's just respectful to let someone fail, to just watch someone fail and not support them. Yeah, I think managers save your people. That's what I love that focus that you put it on. Like, it's about coaching the employee, because you want them to succeed, not just for you, but you want them to succeed for themselves, because when every employee is doing their best, it's better for the whole company. So just thinking about it differently, that letting someone just flail and fail it's not good for any of us.
Yeah. Right. Now, certainly there may be times where an employee isn't going to correct their performance, and you have to, in a delicate and strategic way, figure out what to do. But until you get to that point of saying this is a lost cause, that shouldn't be right away. You need to really invest your time and your resources into trying to get the employee to improve. And again, I just want to say, this is a hard thing to do, right? It's not easy being a manager, right? And these are skills that you learn over time, but it really is important to think about them.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me so much of, in my work as being a manager too, just kind of like having those boundaries of kind of the expectation, like you said, laying it out very clearly. But then there's also like that piece where you do have to kind of have some boundaries, where I'm not going to care. Obviously I care so much about my people, but I can't just let them not do their job, right? So, and that's exactly what you're talking about. But you have to care enough about them to try to help and do what you can. And I'm sure documenting all of this is really important, you would say? Yeah.
I would say the lawyer in me wants documentation. If a claim is filed for age discrimination or retaliation, as we talked about before, I want documents in my file to be able to show that this was performance related, which means performance reviews and performance improvement plans and everything that the employee and the manager and supervisor have done to try to talk to the employee and set the expectations that they're not performing. The absence of those documents allows juries and other, triers of fact to say, I wonder if what they're saying is actually true or whether it is some unlawful reason, i.e. discrimination, et cetera.
Yeah. And kind of the last little question I want to try to squeeze in here, because I know we're running out of time, but I have spoken to different managers who are hesitant to document things because they feel like as soon as they put it in writing, it kind of almost as if it escalates a potential situation. And just kind of curious your take on that, or any suggestions, advice you might have on that.
I mean, I think there's different ways to put things in writing. I think what you're speaking to perhaps is sending the email to the employee, addressing the issues head on. And sometimes by its nature, that can be confrontational. So when you're doing that, you really need to, again, as we said, think about the language used and the tenor of the email. But other ways to document is sending an email to yourself or putting something in a management file that allows you later on to say, hey, what I'm saying now about the employee's poor performance is true, and I can prove that by my contemporaneous email that I sent at the time. So I think that, what I would say to employers who are hesitant to document is, let's talk about why you're hesitant, but also that there are other ways to do that documentation that will serve you well in the long run that aren't potentially as confrontational.
Excellent. Thank you so much. There's so many good things in here that we were able to talk to, and hopefully you can come back. I feel like there's still so much more we can talk about, so we'll figure out if that makes sense in the future. But thank you so much, Alex. Anything that you want to kind of add? Words
of wisdom that I haven't already imparted. I'm a lawyer. I like to talk, so I feel like I've already done that a lot today. No, I mean, again, this is not innate or easy stuff. So employers really have to work on it, and it's well worth the investment of time.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you so much, Betsaida. I've loved doing this.
This has been great. Thanks so much, Alex. My guest. So I hope that you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did, because I really enjoyed it. A couple of things that really stood out to me, and I'd love to hear what stood out to you. Go ahead and put it in the comments, because your feedback is valuable, and I'm always listening to try to find out what it is that you want to hear, what you want to learn. And what really stood out to me in that conversation is really how sometimes avoiding conflict is a form of disrespect. And by not having these direct conversations, we're actually missing these opportunities to really be clear and communicative and direct. And, as I work with people and help them have, navigate these uncomfortable conversations, it's more often than not that I find that the most, some of the most uncomfortable conversations tend to be some of the most necessary conversations. So I think that absolutely captured part of that conversation that I had with Alex. And so thank you so much for watching. This has been Managing in the Moment. And again, I'm Betsaida LeBron with Improv EQ. I hope you have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time.